Hey everybody, welcome back to Shock and Schlock. I'm your host, Herschel Gillis, and today I'm sitting down here with Mr. Jonathan Doe, filmmaker, YouTuber, podcaster. I'm sure I don't need to provide any introduction, but how are you today?
Good, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks. Thanks for sitting down with me. It's really cool to finally speak to you face to face here. I've been a fan for a long time. I would say Cinema's Underbelly was the reason I started my own YouTube channel, so it's really cool to finally sort of have this here. So um
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I've heard quite a bit of people say that they started YouTube their channels based off of something I've done, which is it's cool to see that like I've inspired people or showed people that anybody can do it, you know?
Yeah, it has been really interesting too. I think what drew me to your channel initially was like you were covering stuff that I didn't see other people covering online, and not in like a exploitative way or like making jokes about it. You kind of did it more matter of fact and sort of just, talked about it how it was. Especially with like fetish films like Terrible Meal and stuff like that. And I'm sure I will obviously. But to people who haven't seen your films, I know some of those fetish JV sort of films have inspired yourself. So first off here, what got you interested in that sort of cinema? Was there like a specific first film that you saw there? I know everybody sort of has like a different introduction to it, but what was sort of yours there?
I've always been a person who's like fascinated with like pushing the limit or finding kind of like how extreme things can get. And so I started out with every like anybody else, like kind of with the horror classics and stuff. And then I kind of discovered the underground, and it's kind of like the sick on cinema guys call it like chasing the dragon. Like you feel that. I think the cool thing about cinema is it's like a safe way to explore really uncomfortable feelings, right? So you watch something super fucked up and it makes you feel sick to your stomach, but at the end of the day, you know you're safe, right? So um I started out with the more extreme stuff. Like I saw August Underground, and that made me feel really nasty and gross. And I actually turned that off the first time I watched it. I was like, this is just too mean spirited. But then I came back to it. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna marathon through this and and be able to handle it. And then like where do you go from there? You know, like once you get into you explore all the super extreme stuff that like more traditional horror can offer, you kind of get satiated on that or desensitized to that. Then you start looking at like, okay, well, what else is extreme out there? And extreme pornography, I think, is like that next extension, because you're going from things that are simulated to things that aren't simulated. Like I referenced August Underground, like you know that this is fake. But when you watch something like extreme pornography and watch people do disgusting things or harmful things like blood play kind of stuff or like emetophilia or anything like that, you're like, wow, that's really happening like that. And that makes the horror and disturbing elements just that much. It's like it's taking it to that next level. And so that's initially what gravitated me towards kind of the JAV and like extreme kind of stuff. Like I had heard about Terrible Meal and I was like, that's fucking vile. There's no way I'd want to watch that, you know? And then I finally reached the point where I was like, you know what, I do want to watch it. And when I watched it, I thought it had artistic merit. And so talking about like kind of what you said with cinema's underbelly is like most people talk about this stuff and just go like, oh, it's so nasty, it's gross. But I wanted to kind of look at it through an artistic lens in a serious manner. And I really think that a lot of these films, like as disgusting as they can be, um, they do. Some people will argue whether they're an extension of extreme cinema, and I obviously think that they are. And so, but yeah, that's kind of the path that I took, is just um trying to find what's the next step to disturb me or make me feel uncomfortable.
Definitely. And speaking of that, I know I can probably pinpoint at several films that have inspired your own. We'll get into
Mhm.
that later, but would you say there's ever been a point where you were sort of exploring that side of cinema that there was something like too much for you? I know that people say that about like extreme horror, but I feel like JV stuff and stuff like that sort of is a separate beast on its own. And stuff with like, Guso Milk, GSKD, like there's a variety of topics that are explored there as well. Has there ever been one that was like too much that you shut off, or something that was maybe, too out there for you?
Uh, when I was starting out, like first exploring this kind of cinema when I was younger, there were times when I would turn something off just because I thought it was too, like I said, mean spirited or messed up. But at this point, I think that I've been hardened and seen enough messed up
Yeah.
stuff that I I don't think nothing really. I mean, things do shock me. I'm not gonna say that they won't. Like I
Mhm.
talked about the LPS films. The very first time I saw the LPS films, I was like, wow, this is fucking terrible, you
Yeah.
know?
Hmm.
But I sat through it. A mixtape I saw that I thought was pretty fucking awful, but I still sat through it, was like the Death Files ISIS, which is all like high quality, high definition, like basically ISIS executions. Um but no, I didn't turn it off. I just was like, fuck man, this is rough, you know.
Yeah, definitely, for
Um
sure.
but yeah, like I would say LPS and then Death Files ISIS is the last time I can really think where I was like, this is really extreme. And it did give me an uneasy feeling. But yeah, I mean, to me, people talk about boundaries. Like my boundary just is legality. I'm not going to watch something that's illegal, but but outside of that, I'm pretty much up to game for pretty much anything at this point.
Definitely. And as just a side note here, somebody else that's seen the LPS trilogy, um, what do you think? What's your takeaway from those? Just as a little side note here, like, I know that when I was watching them, they definitely seem, consent maybe is a gray area in those, to say the least.
Well, I think that's the disturbing thing about them is obviously, like, I think it depends when you look at like geographical location of where something was released as well as time period. When it comes to like extreme pornography, it gets muddy whether it's like consensual or not, right? Especially
Definitely.
like in the 90s. There was like organized crime that was like involved with a lot of the extreme pornography that was coming out at the time, like the Yakuza and stuff. And so with the LPS films, I mean, it's been a while since I've actually like sat down and watched them, but when I was watching it, and for those who are listening who may not be familiar with those films, they start out with like your typical Japanese porno. It's girls kind of like on a casting couch kind of thing. And then they blindfold them and take them into another room, which is like a dungeon. And it has a cell in there. And they walk the girls in there, and there's a naked guy or multiple guys. And the whole cell is filled with real animal parts, like stuff from a slaughterhouse. And they unblindfold her, and her reaction seems very genuine that she
Hmm.
did
Definitely.
not expect
Yeah.
that this would take place. And then they humiliate her by covering her in real blood and animal parts. And then they do I have to be careful about how I
No,
what kind
no,
of
you're fine. Yeah.
and then they rape her, and it's hard to determine whether it's simulated or not.
Yeah, it
I
is.
mean, what and I think that's what makes them so disturbing is you go, I don't know if they, I mean, there's, as someone who makes this kind of stuff, like I can say that you can make this stuff and it can be consensual. You talk about it beforehand and talk about what's going to happen. But when it comes to 90s JAV stuff, I don't know how much, if the Yakuza was involved, if they cared,
Yeah,
you know.
for sure.
So I think that's what makes them disturbing is you're watching it and you're like, I don't know if this is real or not. And if it's not, it's awful, you know.
Mm,
So that's my take. That's what makes them disturbing is the mystery of whether, I mean, if it was all consensual, then like I applaud them. They made something pretty fucking nasty. But if it's not consensual, it's just another example of kind of the darker side of art, you know. So
definitely. And as someone that not make something like LPS, I mean, your newest film obviously has one part that's LPS inspired for sure, but what is like the vibe on set? for that. I know they, your films are more like a combo of the fetish and horror films, like sort of mixed together, but I'm sure that, the films are definitely intense, and I can sort of tell that they're, um physically demanding sometimes as well. So what's like I'm sure there's a lot of talk beforehand about what is okay, what's not, people suggesting things, but what's sort of like the general vibe on set there?
I mean, the general vibe on set is fun. We're having fun. I mean, we're all friends. Like me and Felicia are good friends. Like we talk regularly and we hang out outside of working together. Uh, with my newest movie, Defilement of a Porcelain Doll, that was the first time I'd ever worked with Puck. But Puck and Felicia are good friends, and Puck and I got along really well during set. And when it comes to like Marcus and Jesse, I've been really good friends with them for a long time. So it really, as much as it's work, it's also just a bunch of friends like hanging out and having fun together. And as much as things may seem like they're happening kind of off the cuff, like we just decided in the moment to do it, in reality, all of my films, I don't write scripts, I write treatments. And for those who don't know what a treatment is, it's kind of just like an overview of what the movie, like what the plot is and what each scene is going to be. And all of those things are discussed and uh, collaborated on at length before we ever step in front of a camera. So, especially when it came to Defilement of a Porcelain Doll, most of the scenes were actually suggested by the actresses. Like, spoiler alert, but in Defilement of a Porcelain Doll, there's a scene where we cut Felicia's pubes off and then shove them down her throat. Felicia proposed that idea. That she thought of that. I wasn't, and I was like, "Fuck yeah, let's do it."
Mm-hmm.
I proposed the watering can aspect, but they were gonna pee on each other already. That was something that the water sports element was something that they proposed, and I just got a little creative with how it was going to be done. But Felicia and Puck had decided they were going to pee on each other already at that point. And yeah, so there's no element of surprise. It's not like I'm this hardcore director who's like, I paid you, you got to do this.
Yeah.
A collaborative effort that we all kind of thought of, like, with, especially at the point that we had started on EGN3, I had, like, Felicia fully was familiar with working with me and the kind of content and what kind of movies I like to make. And Puck had seen the movies before. So when I talked to him, I was like, hey, I want this movie to be fucking nasty. Like, what can we do to make it nasty? And they were like, hell yeah, they were on board. And so we all went into it with the mindset of like, how can we make this gross? And kind of continuing on that, like, there were scenes that were mentally and physically demanding, and we really made sure to like check in with each other. We had a safe word on set so that at any point, if anyone needed a break or the scene kind of got too intense, we could stop at any point. So, I mean, everybody's safety and well-being and comfortability are all like at the forefront of what's important. But yeah, we all have fun, and we usually like go get food and stuff afterwards. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we shoot, like with Barf Bunny, we shot Barf Bunny, and then Felicia took me to go get my first deep dish pizza, and we like hung out
Oh yeah.
afterwards. That's
Yeah.
cool.
And would you say that that's one of the things that keeps you going, like making films? I mean, I'm sure there's other elements there, but getting to like make this like piece of art with friends, are like people that you already know, getting to work with cool people, and is that like a major driving factor as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that within my career, especially like starting out, like at first it was like really hard to just find an actress who was down to be naked on camera, like
Mm.
I made a short film for Marcus Cook's Symbolicus Volume 1, and in it I have a girl who's like playing Mother Nature, and she's walking around naked in the forest. And at that point I hadn't developed like kind of a reputation for myself, and I hadn't really met a lot of other talent out there. So it was a struggle to find someone who would be willing to do something like that. But now I have this whole group of people who I could hit up at any moment and say, hey, do you want to make something crazy or nasty? And now I feel like I have a really good team of people who pretty much is down to do any kind of weird, crazy idea I can think of. I can just write to them and say, hey, what do you think about doing this? And most likely they'd probably say yeah. And so that, I feel like I'm fortunate at this point in my career that I have access to other people who are down to make the same kind of art that I want to make. So that's a big drive that I have, is I feel privileged in the fact that I have these resources that I know a lot of people don't have. So
Definitely. Yeah. And Defilement specifically, out of the 3 erotic grotesque nonsense films that are out currently, I've been a fan of the previous 2 as well, but this one definitely felt like larger scale, more ambitious. I mean, I could tell it was more expensive for sure. There was more grand shots. How did this film sort of feel compared to the previous 2? Those were a bit smaller scale in my eyes, at least. Looked, you know, not as ambitious as this, I would say.
uh the other 2 films, like every time I make a movie, it feels stressful because it's like there's so many moving parts to making a movie. You don't want to forget to shoot a scene or forget to shoot an element. You want continuity to be important. So all of those things are important. But when it comes to EGN3, I felt I almost felt like I had bit off more than I can chew. I was like,
Mhm.
especially because these are all really small productions. Like I wear a million different hats when I make a movie. Like I'm the director, I'm the producer, I'm the cinematographer, I'm the editor. I do prop design, I do like all this stuff. And so I have to make sure that I don't forget a single thing. And with this movie, there were so many, like Barf Bunny has really like can be broken in 2 parts. It's just eat fruit, throw up, and then get your head cut off, right? So there's not a lot like, oh, I have to remember to bring 3 different kinds of fruit. I need to make sure I bring all 3 of the jars, bring lighting or whatever. But with the Degenerates, we had a bunch of scenes, but like we're just dealing with one thing. We're just dealing with this prop, Make
Mhm.
sure to bring the Polaroid camera, make sure you've got the blood and stuff for the corpse. But with this, there were so many different scenes. There was 8 different scenes, and each one involved different things. So it was like, okay, make sure you don't forget the scotch tape, make sure that you don't forget the different BDSM masks that you have. Make sure that you don't forget whatever. And so actually at the beginning, at the start, and we had a very limited time. Like I had to rent that venue. The other 2 movies we shot at a hotel room, so we can be there all day. It's just my
Mhm.
hotel room. But with this, like I've got 12 hours to make a feature length movie basically. And I also wanted to respect Puck's time and Felicia's time because we're shooting it in chronological order. And I'm sure Felicia's not down to, like, wants to be sitting in piss as least the least amount
Yeah.
of time possible.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to be cognizant of those things, but I'm also making sure that I've got all the stuff. Like one thing that I actually had like almost a little panic attack at the beginning of the movie was we got there on time, but I really didn't want to feel like anybody was sitting around not doing anything. And so I was rushing to get the set up so that we could just start shooting. And I went and I pulled out the Polaroid camera for the movie, and I couldn't find the charger for
Mhm.
it. And I was like, fuck, dude, we're going to be using this camera for 12 hours repeatedly. It's going to die. And I had remembered, because we shot it in Chicago, I live in San Diego. I remember when I was packing, I made sure I had the charging cord. And suddenly I'm on set and I'm looking and I can't fucking find it. And I was like, holy shit, like this camera is gonna die and we're gonna not be able to film. Like, and I started almost having a panic attack, and I like walked off set and like was walking. It was like raining outside. I just like walked in the rain and walked for like half a
Oh,
mile.
yeah.
And I was like, you need to get it together. Like you're the director, everybody's relying on you. Like you can't afford to freak out right now. And so I thought about it and I was like, oh yeah, I put it in my other bag. And then
Yeah.
but like, you know, when you get panicked, your fucking ability to remember and process things
Hmm.
messed up. But like that, yeah, it just felt so much bigger. And I felt like it was almost like the how I felt about the two previous movies is how I felt about every single individual scene. Like, don't forget these different elements. So um with it being bigger, it was a lot more stressful. So
For sure. Yeah, and coming out of that, I mean, the film is great. I was a big fan of it. But what would you say is something that you're like most proud of with this film? It really felt like a big step, I would say. I mean, it's the longest film, the most expensive, clearly. It's episodic, so it's a little bit different there. What would you say is like your favorite part of this film?
um I like that I was able with this movie to really kind of showcase my cinematography a lot more, because the other two movies kind of just took place in a really tight, small space. And like with Barf Bunny, it was all really tight close-up shots of Felicia eating. And with the Degenerates, it was a found footage movie, so it's not really designed to have good cinematography. It's just um shooting the action. But with this movie, I was able to kind of create an atmosphere and create a tone with my cinematography, like shooting outside and shooting all the abandoned elements and just making it feel like you were isolated and alone. And um I think out of all of it, the thing I'm most proud of is the cinematography. I feel like a lot of people had expressed like it was like a step up in my filmmaking, but I feel like it wasn't that I didn't have that skill before. It was that this movie allowed me to showcase it more. So I think that that's what I like about it.
Yeah, I think that like the opening shots of the film are probably some of my favorite of last year. And it was really cool to see too, because I heard you say on the Sick on Cinema podcast that it was filmed in Fort Wayne. That's just like an hour away from me, so it was like kind of gave me like a greater appreciation of where I was.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was really cool to see that.
Yeah, you honestly have got access to a lot of crazy stuff if you ever want to make a movie.
Oh
Because
yeah.
I mean,
I had some
careful not to
friends
get.
in. Oh, sorry.
I'd say, I mean, I've done urban exploring, and you got to be careful not to run into any bad people when you're doing that. But yeah, you've got access to a lot of really cool stuff if you want to shoot something.
For sure. Yeah. I had friends that were into urban exploration when I was in college, and there was some stories to be had there for sure. Exploring abandoned buildings, sometimes you find things that you may not want to. So, um, but away from the camera and everything too, what was sort of like the biggest challenge during this production? Was it the time constraint, sort of like getting everything set up, or what would you say like in comparison was more difficult with this film?
I had a lot more people. Like, this was the biggest production I'd ever done, and so I was very concerned about making sure that everybody felt like they were being considered and being acknowledged. And so I was constantly checking in with everybody. I was really uh because this was the most intense shoot, I think, for everybody, because it was the action, the fetish elements were some of the most extreme stuff we had done. And so making sure that Felicia and Puck were comfortable and that I was respecting their uh I don't know, their comfort and their needs was important. The same thing with Jesse. Jesse was kind of tucked away in this little corner making all of the gore stuff. It took her pretty much the whole shoot to make all of that kind of stuff. And so basically in between shooting scenes, I would go over and check on Jesse and make sure that she was okay and she didn't feel forgotten, you know.
Mhm, yeah.
um, and but yeah, making sure that like in the behind the scenes of the Defilement release that I just did, I had talked about safety. And initially with the fluid scene, what the plan was to have Felicia wear the dog cone, and then she would get throat fucked with the dildo and puke, and the puke was going to collect in the dog cone. But when we shot that scene, um, the way that it was, like the way that we were holding onto the dog cone didn't allow her to like put her head forward to let the vomit fall to the ground, and it all collected in the dog cone, and instead of it falling to the sides and collecting like around her neck, it all just fell back into her mouth again.
Mm-hmm.
And she was afraid that she was going to choke on her vomit, and that was really scary. Like I was like, oh fuck, because we just didn't think about that. And so I actually have on the DVD the behind the scenes footage of that element. And so we ended up changing that scene so that the dog cone is introduced after she vomits, and then it's used during the pee scene, because I wanted some kind of fluid to get collected in the dog cone. And but that was really scary to me, in that I don't know, I just wanted to make sure that my friend was safe, and,
Yep.
and we so I would say that those elements were uh important, and like I don't know, making sure that Felicia was able to go to the bathroom because she was tied to that chair for like 8 hours. And um yeah, I think the biggest challenge was just making sure that everybody was okay, because it was so physically demanding, and all of that. So
For sure. And something my like favorite scene of the film probably was the ending there, like that last like shot with Puck and Felicia, the final like aspect of Puck's character sort of getting off. And it sort of reminded me of like Women's Flesh, My Red Guts, with a little bit like the self-harm and sexual element there.
Mhm.
Was that a scene that you had planned going into the movie, or was that just something that came along? Because it felt like that scene was very like climactic, I would say, for lack of a better word. Um, Felt very like planned out, and it was haunting and sort of left like this cold feeling in me when I finished the film.
That was how I planned on ending the movie from the get-go. um and I was nervous about shooting that scene because I felt, you can write something on paper and think it looks really fucking cool, but shooting it can be a whole different thing. And so when I was shooting it, I was like, this is either going to come off like haunting and fucked up, that Puck's character is getting off to like killing this person, or it's going to come off cheesy. And so I was really nervous. Like I had all of these scenes, and I had this underlying worry throughout shooting the whole movie, like this movie's going to either seem more extreme or it's going to seem softer, because I'm not shooting as much. Like, yeah, there's a gore scene, but it's not as gore heavy as like the Degenerates was, or the ending of Barf Bunny, which is like 10 minutes of a decapitation. So I was kind of a little bit nervous, like, are these last two scenes, like the gore scene and the climax scene, it's that it really came off exactly as how I hoped it would.
Hmm.
And Puck is such a pro. Like I've shot masturbation scenes before, and not to disappoint people, but a lot of stuff that you shoot when you're shooting porn is like the girl's acting. She's not
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
and and like you don't realize that sometimes you're like shooting, she's masturbating for 3 minutes and you're like, okay, cut, and she just stops, and then you go back to something else. And so I wasn't prepared for Puck's professionalism, that she actually was going to come on camera. And so I was like, when she actually came and she actually like squirted, I was like, holy shit, like Puck's the
Yeah.
real deal. Like, I was like, damn, because I didn't think she was going to go there, and she did. And so yeah, that last scene, I love that scene. And I showed one of my good buddies the movie before I really showed anybody else, and he said that that ending was going to be really memorable for a lot of people. And so to hear people describe that and say that, um I'm glad to hear it. And bringing up Tamakichi Honoru, like yeah, his films have been a major influence for my stuff, so I'm glad to hear that someone like you who's knowledgeable about these films like picks up on that for sure.
Yeah, I think it was a really great closer to the film. I definitely think that certainly like cemented it in my eyes as like probably your best film, I would say.
Thank you.
I love all of them, but yeah. Um, so going forward though, what's the plan for like future projects? Are you continuing the EGN series? Are you looking to sort of expand into more different aspects there? You recently started the Murderabilia Show and Tell YouTube channel, so you're obviously like continuing to sort of expand into other areas. So like what's the next step here?
My next project that I'm working, I've got two projects that are going to be coming out hopefully or like towards the beginning of this year. I have a documentary that I'm working on that I'm not ready to go into super detail about, but it's going to have um a lot of heavy hitter people featured in it from the underground horror community, um and a lot of up and comers and stuff, which I'm excited about. I think it's going to make a splash when it comes out. But I've got that documentary coming out, and then um I've always kind of once I felt I built a big enough name for myself, I always kind of wanted to put out like a set of like my early work, some of my student films and stuff I made. And so I'm in the process of putting together a like a multi-disc set that has a lot of my earlier films that I made when I was younger. And it's going to have kind of like uh maybe like a documentary segment talking about like the history of Putrid Productions and when I started out bootlegging and doing the archival outfit to finally starting making films and releasing other people's stuff. And so I think people are going to be excited about that. It's going to have um at least 4 short films that I made that I think people are going to like. Like the first film I ever made was called Fistful of Girlfriends, and I made it when I was in film school, and we weren't allowed to show gore. And it was kind of my version of like a rape revenge film without actually doing rape revenge. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like this fuck boy who's dating 3 girls at once, and all 3 girls find out that they're being cheated on, so they want to like enact their revenge and kill him. But we weren't allowed to use real gore. So like I shot it like he's behind a curtain and it's like his silhouette being like disemboweled and killed and stuff. And it's like kind of a lot of fun. It's a lot more campy. It's like a change of pace of what I do now. But yeah, so I'm gonna be putting that out. And then I have a more standard horror movie that I want to be putting out also that I've been in talks with my friend about, which is going to be pretty fucking brutal and awful. And uh I would not be surprised if it's controversial. So I've got those going. I wouldn't say that I'm done with EGN, but I'm just kind of taking a pause from it because I don't want to just be typecasted as like just the fetish gore guy. I want to show that I do other things. I'm into other things. So this year is kind of more focused on like the horror and documentary aspects, and then like the murderabilia true crime kind of stuff as well.
Definitely. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to those. It's always been like great seeing you grow and expand into other things here. And sort of closing off here, for people that somehow aren't familiar, where can we find your films? Where can we find you online?
So I've got 2 YouTube channels. I've got Cinema's Underbelly, which I kind of took a hiatus on while I was working on the EGN movies, but I'm planning on getting back into that again. So people should be seeing more content from that coming soon. And then I've got my other YouTube channel, Murderabilia Show and Tell, and that I have a big Murderabilia collection. So I basically each episode is me taking an item from my collection and talking about the history behind them. And then I've got my podcast, the Uneasy Train Explorers Club, where I interview people from different fringe communities, people from the horror underground to porn stars to crime scene cleaners to murderers, just people outside of the mainstream. And I'm about to start season 3 of that podcast. So You guys can check that out as well. And then you can buy my movies and other people's movies on putridproductions.bigcartel.com. That's where you can, everything that we talked about, you can buy DVDs of, but I've also put out other people's works as well. So you can check that out. And then I would say the best social media to follow me on is either Facebook or on Twitter, which is Putrid Prod. And that's where I'll post pictures of stuff that's like not censored. So if you want to see tits and boobs and blood, check that out.
Yeah, all the good stuff.
Yeah. So yeah.
Well, Jonathan, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for personally sending me the screener for the film once again. Really enjoyed it. I've seen it 3 times now just with the screener waiting on my DVDs. So I'm excited to watch it again. So yeah, just thank you for coming on. It's been a great conversation. It's been great finally seeing you face to face after all these delays of mine as well. So
well, I'm glad we were able to make it happen. So
yeah,
thanks.
thanks. I appreciate it.
All right. Peace.
Bye.